Movie camera: The disturbing story of Clara Voss. To the outside world, Clara Voss was an inspiration. A fragile, wheelchair-bound girl with big glasses, a shy smile, and a voice as soft as a whisper. Everyone adored Clara. Teachers called her resilient. Neighbors praised her courage. And her mother, Evelyn, was celebrated as a hero, the single mom who had sacrificed everything to care for her sick little girl. From charity fundraisers to hospital visits, their story touched hearts. Together, they looked like a perfect example of love and perseverance. But behind that facade was something much darker. Because Clara wasn't sick. Not at all. For years, Evelyn Voss had convinced the world her daughter was suffering from dozens of illnesses: leukemia, seizures, muscular weakness, and more. She shaved Clara's head to mimic chemotherapy. She wheeled her around in a chair she didn't need. She even drugged her with pills meant for conditions Clara never had. This wasn't care. It was control. A twisted form of abuse known as fabricated illness syndrome, where a caregiver invents sickness to gain sympathy, attention, and power. Clara's body wasn't failing her. Her mother was. And as Clara grew older, she began to understand the horrifying truth. Her only chance at freedom might be unthinkable. Life in the Voss household was suffocating. Evelyn monitored every move, every meal, every word. If Clara questioned her supposed illnesses, Evelyn silenced her with threats and punishments. "You need me," she would say. "Without me, you'd be dead by now." But Clara wasn't dying. She was waking up. Late at night, while her mother slept, Clara found a secret escape: the internet. There, she discovered a life beyond her prison. Friends, source, possibilities. And one night, love. She met a young man online, Adam Kells. Troubled, lonely, but gentle with her in ways she had never known. He didn't see her as a sick child. He saw her as a woman. Through their messages, Clara tasted freedom for the first time. She began to imagine a life where she could walk without pretending, laugh without guilt, and love without fear. But there was one obstacle: her mother. Clara told Adam the truth, that Evelyn wasn't the hero the world saw, but her captor. That every hospital trip was a lie. That every shaved lock of hair was another chain. Adam listened. And he promised her escape. But freedom would come at a price. One June night, while Evelyn slept, Adam crept into the Voss home. Clara hid in the bathroom, trembling as muffled cries echoed through the walls. And then, silence. When it was over, Evelyn was gone. And Clara, for the first time in her life, was free. Or so she thought. The next morning, headlines screamed of tragedy. Devoted mother murdered in her sleep. The community wept. Neighbors lit candles. Charities mourned. Everyone believed Evelyn Voss had been an angel taken too soon. But as detectives dug deeper, the truth began to surface. The wheelchair in the corner? Barely used. The hospital files? Inconsistent. And Clara, once seen as frail and helpless, was suddenly walking freely down hallways. The illusion cracked. The world realized Evelyn hadn't been a hero. She had been the architect of years of abuse. And Clara? She wasn't the tragic patient anymore. She was both victim and conspirator. The courts faced a dilemma. Was she a cold-blooded killer? Or a desperate survivor? In the end, Clara was sentenced to prison for her role in her mother's death. Adam, her accomplice, was handed life without parole. And the cruelest twist of all? For the first time in her life, Clara was healthy. She could eat freely, wear what she liked, walk as she pleased. But her freedom was locked behind steel bars. The disturbing story of Clara Voss forces us to confront painful questions. How much control should a parent hold over a child? When does survival become crime? And can someone be both a victim and guilty at the same time? Justice was served in the courtroom. But it came at a devastating cost: the destruction of a family and the haunting image of a daughter whose only escape from her mother was death. But the story doesn't end there. Because behind prison walls, Clara's name only grew. Supporters wrote her letters. Strangers called her a hero. And whispers began to spread that she might one day walk free. And if that day comes, what happens next? Clara Voss thought she wanted freedom. But when the cell doors closed behind her, she realized she had traded one cage for another. This time, the cage was steel. Cold concrete walls, iron bars, and the constant hum of voices in the prison yard. But here's the twist. For Clara, this cage felt different. For the first time in her life, she could choose her meals. She could walk to the cafeteria without pretending to need a chair. She could breathe without her mother hovering at her shoulder. It was freedom, trapped inside punishment. But prison is never a safe haven. Whispers followed her through the halls. Other inmates called her the girl who killed her mom. Some spat at her. Others stared in awe. Because Clara wasn't just another inmate. She was infamous. Letters began to arrive. Stacks of them. From strangers across the country. From women who said they understood her. From men who swore they loved her. Some saw Clara as a survivor, a young woman who had endured years of torment under a mother's twisted control. Others saw her as a villain. But Clara? She knew how to play both roles. Behind those prison walls, she perfected her act. To some inmates, she was fragile, innocent, a girl broken by abuse. To others, she was cunning, dangerous, someone you didn't cross. Even to the guards, Clara managed to inspire pity. Tears in her eyes, trembling hands, her voice quivering as she spoke of nightmares that haunted her sleep. But here's the chilling irony. The same skills her mother had used on the world, Clara had inherited. Evelyn Voss had manipulated doctors, charities, and neighbors. And now Clara was manipulating everyone around her. Meanwhile, outside the prison walls, Clara's story wasn't fading. It was growing. True crime podcasts, documentaries, social media debates that split families down the middle. Was Clara a murderer? Or was she a victim who had been pushed to the edge? Public opinion was divided. Some demanded she rot in prison forever. Others raised money for her appeal, calling her a symbol of survival against abuse. And Clara thrived in that spotlight. From her cell, she wrote letters to her supporters, painting herself as misunderstood, trapped, longing for redemption. Some believed her so deeply, they began campaigning for her release. The world outside was arguing about Clara Voss. But the real Clara? She was quietly building a following. But there was one letter that stood out among the rest. It was from Adam Kells, her boyfriend, her partner in crime, the man who had carried out the killing. Despite his life sentence, Adam never let go of Clara. He wrote her long, rambling notes about love, loyalty, and destiny. And here's where the story takes another sinister twist. Clara wrote back. Even after everything, the trial, the headlines, the judgment, Clara clung to the one connection that had freed her from her mother's control. To prison staff, it was a red flag. To psychologists, it was a pattern. Clara wasn't cutting ties with the darkness in her past. She was holding on to it. Years passed. Clara became an adult behind bars. But the whispers about her never stopped. And then, something happened that no one expected.
She spoke of rehabilitation, of therapy, of finding faith in the darkest places. And as she spoke, tears glistened in her eyes. Some in the audience shifted uncomfortably. Others nodded. But then came the voices of those who remembered the night of the crime. Han Voss's surviving relatives stood and described the devastation. How Evelyn's death had left scars no parole could heal. How Han had spent his final years broken, haunted by the memory of his daughter standing by while his wife was slaughtered. Their words pierced the silence. "She is not a victim," one relative cried. "She is a manipulator. If you let her out, she will do it again." The room felt heavy. 'Cause the truth was, no one really knew. The parole board deliberated for hours. The arguments were fierce. One side believed Clara had been punished enough, that she had served her time and deserved a chance to start again. The other side saw a pattern that had never changed. Lies, manipulation, control. A predator dressed in innocence. When the final vote was announced, the world held its breath. Clara Voss had been granted parole. The gates of the prison opened. Clara stepped into the daylight for the first time in 25 years. Supporters cheered. Protesters screamed. Cameras flashed. She walked past them all with the same small smile she had worn the night of her arrest. To some, it was the smile of survival. To others, it was the smile of evil. And just like that, Clara Voss was free. For a while, Clara kept a low profile. She lived in a halfway house, got a job under a different name, attended therapy sessions. To the public eye, she was just another ex-con trying to rebuild her life. But whispers began to spread. Neighbors said she was charming, even likable. She volunteered at community centers, smiled at children, offered advice to struggling mothers. She looked like the perfect picture of redemption. But then came the stories that didn't make the headlines. Letters to old boyfriends, cryptic posts online, conversations overheard in hushed tones. It seemed Clara was still weaving webs. And people started asking, had she truly changed? Or was she playing the same game? In a new arena. Months after her release, Clara was called in for a routine parole check. But this time something was different. Investigators had been watching her, monitoring her movements, tracking her communications, and what they discovered chilled them. Encrypted messages, secret meetings, plans that sounded eerily familiar, the outlines of another scheme, another manipulation, another betrayal. They confronted Clara, asking her directly, "Are you planning something?" She smiled just as she had years before, and said softly, "You'll never prove it." The story of Clara Voss does not end neatly. It is not a simple tale of crime and punishment, victim and villain, guilt and redemption. It is a story about deception, how far it can go, how many lives it can destroy, and how even when the prison gates close, the danger doesn't always stay behind them. Because the true terror of Clara Voss is not just what she did. It's what she represents. That evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes, it looks like the perfect daughter. Clara Voss is free. But freedom comes with a question that haunts everyone who remembers her crime. If she could betray the people who loved her most, what is she capable of now?
Her lawyers filed for an appeal. They argued that the original trial had been flawed, that the jury hadn't considered the years of psychological abuse, that Clara hadn't been a free woman in her mother's home, she had been a prisoner long before prison bars. The appeal shook the courtroom. For Han Voss's family, Evelyn's relatives, it was like ripping open a wound that had barely begun to heal. Reporters swarmed the courthouse. Supporters waved signs calling for Clara's freedom. Protesters shouted for justice. And Clara? She walked into court, shackled but smiling faintly, like she knew the world was still listening. In a shocking decision, the judges reduced her sentence. Clara Voss would still serve life in prison, but with the possibility of parole after 25 years. For the first time, Clara had a sliver of hope. A chance. She could one day walk out of prison, into the same world she once manipulated with lies. And the public was torn apart all over again. Was this justice? Or was this a dangerous mistake? Clara Voss's story is one of deception, survival, and the darkest ironies of human nature. She was raised in a prison of lies, freed herself through blood, and now lives in a cell of stone. But the most disturbing truth is this. Even from behind bars, Clara still commands belief. There are those who see her as a monster, and those who see her as a martyr. She doesn't just destroy lives with violence. She destroys them with trust. And now, with parole on the horizon, the world faces a terrifying question. If Clara Voss is released, what happens next? Decades had passed since Clara Voss sat in that courtroom, her hands bound, her face unreadable. For many, her story had faded into a memory. Another tragic crime. Another courtroom drama. Another headline buried in the archives. But inside those prison walls, Clara was waiting. Year after year, she marked the days. She read books, wrote letters, and perfected the same soft voice she had once used to win sympathy. She was no longer the trembling teenager who had clung to her boyfriend's plan. Now she was a woman. Patient. But behind her calm was calculation. Because Clara knew something most people had forgotten. Her parole eligibility was coming. While Clara waited, the world outside had changed. True crime podcasts had turned her story into a cautionary tale. Documentaries replayed her life on repeat, dissecting every lie, every manipulation, every betrayal. And public opinion? It was still divided. Some saw Clara as the ultimate victim, a girl raised in captivity, forced into violence by desperation. Others saw her as dangerous, a liar so convincing she could fool anyone willing to believe. And when whispers of her possible parole began to surface, the debate reignited like fire. Protests outside courthouses. Petitions signed by thousands. Families on both sides pleading for justice or for mercy. The world was ready to fight over Clara Voss. The day finally came. The parole hearing. Clara Voss walked into the room in a plain prison uniform, her long hair tied back, her face calm. On one side sat the board of officials. On the other, the survivors. Han Voss's family. Relatives of Evelyn, the mother who had lost her life. People who carried the scars of Clara's choices. They watched her carefully, waiting for signs of remorse. Clara spoke softly, her voice trembling just enough to sound believable. "I am sorry for what happened. I wish I could take it back. I was lost. I was scared. I was trapped." Tears slid down her face. She spoke of her mother's control, her isolation, the nights she wished she could disappear. She told them prison had changed her, that she was ready to live a different life. And for a moment, it almost sounded true. But then came the cross-examination. "Clara, if you were trapped, why did you plan the murder for weeks? Why did you write those messages to your boyfriend? Why did you laugh after the crime was done?" Clara froze. Her mask cracked just for a second. But in that room, a second was enough. The parole board deliberated for hours. Some believed Clara had shown growth. They argued she was a victim first, a criminal second. That keeping her locked up forever was cruel. Others saw through her act. They pointed to her manipulations, her patterns of deception. They argued that letting her out would be like releasing a wolf into a flock of sheep. The decision was split down the middle. But the final vote leaned in Clara's favor. She wasn't free. Not yet. But she had been granted a review date. A second chance to argue for her release within the next few years. The world erupted. News channels blared headlines. Protesters marched in the streets. Survivors' families wept in anger. Supporters celebrated. Clara Voss wasn't just a prisoner anymore. She was a possibility. In the months after her parole hearing, Clara became more than a name. She became a symbol. To some, she represented the hidden victims of abuse, a girl who had suffered and deserved redemption. To others, she was proof of evil in disguise.
Follow, subscribe, and hit the notification button for more chilling story.